This is Freeze, and you're watching Thorin season, and I would have been better than forgiven if I wouldn't get injured.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be Maxlore, who obviously played for a number of years in the LEC. I mean, admittedly, it was mainly called the EU LCS back then. People might remember he made it to top 8 at Worlds, obviously, in the infamous Misfits almost upset of SK Telecom. Keyword almost there. And obviously, I thought another interesting thing about your career is you're not someone who was a rookie who came in a ULCS. Like, you've been a journeyman. You've been all around the scene, and in some ways, like that term, if people don't know from UK sports, it's basically someone who's played a long time. They've just been on good teams, bad teams, everything in between, and you just keep playing. You're a player. So first and foremost, before we get into things, in case people don't know, if the last time people saw you was on Misfits in LEC last year. Obviously, at this point in time, something of a cursed lineup. We'll get to that later. What are you doing at the moment? Like, are you still active? Have you come back to playing? Are you trying to become a pro again?
Yeah, I mean, I spent the past 4 or 5 months playing quite a lot of Soliko, averaging out to 15 or 16 games a day, and just trying to make my way back up, keep improving on stuff that I didn't necessarily focus too much on in when I was playing professionally, life stuff and all that, because there's just not much time. But now, yeah, I'm looking to make a comeback.
Now, as I kind of alluded to there, that you've been around a while, and probably a lot longer than people would realize unless they watch the challenger level and below that. I looked it up online actually, and you were playing back literally 6 years ago when you, and that's the other thing. Obviously, you're not super young, you're 23 now, so you would have still been a reasonable age, 17, turning 18 around that time, right? Yeah. I'm always curious when people have played for a few years at the lower tiers, and then suddenly they get to the higher tiers and they break through, etc. I'll give you a very quick anecdote. There's a ridiculous story that guy who was on SK Telecom last year, Clid, who looked like one of the best junglers in the world. There's a real story where supposedly he was literally something mental, like a gold or a bronze player, and then he just read a guide till he's in. This sounds like some other movie. He read a guide till he's in that said go in when you hit the queue, and then he just literally became challenger and then went to LPL or something crazy. So obviously you didn't have a ridiculous story like that, but. What were you really just grinding away? Were you not playing seriously? Were you a semi-pro? What were the first years like for Maxlore?
I started in season 3. I downloaded the game in season 2, played a few games, thought it was complete shit, and then I just didn't touch it for 6 months. Then somehow I got back into the game again and played. I always like improving in whatever I do, so I just played to improve while I was at school. I was 15. Never saw myself becoming a pro. I felt like I was kind of pressured and into living the meta life. You go to uni, you get a job, get a wife, have kids, grow old and die. But I went to uni and got a good PC, and I actually climbed the ranks a lot. Before I played on a 5 FPS laptop, and then bam, I got a gaming PC with still an office mouse, and I made it to rank 1. And while I was at uni, I actually went to UK LANs, and as you said, slowly but surely, I got into more teams, improving. First, it was a sub for a challenger level team, challenger series, and then it was a main position in challenger team, and then it was an LCS team finally, eventually. So yeah, I dropped out of uni and tried to pursue my dream. Told my dad, if I don't make it to the LCS in a year, then I'll go back to uni. And it took me 6 months. And yeah, just bounced around. Then the story is set Roccat and Giants, Roccat, Misfits.
Sure. So as you say there, you were actually a sub, and it wasn't just any team, it was actually G2. But here's the key detail that people will understand. It was G2 that was called Gamers 2. It wasn't just called G2. So this was actually just when basically Ocelot had just given up being a player. And obviously they had some of the players who did go into the EU LCS, now LEC, and in fact become champions. So one thing I wanted to ask was, this was back when Perks was just some cocky kid who was a challenger player who thought he was the best mid laner, but no one maybe knew if he was or wasn't. So what was Perks like back then? And what was his team generally when you were there? I know you were only there for a few weeks, but how would you describe it?
From what I remember, I was not the best player, but Perks was actually quite good at that time. He communicated really well for the first time I played with him, and kind of knew what he had to do around mid lane. There was also Smitty J, I think Jesse as well, making like memes about when he played Sivir, he was calling himself the Scuttle Crab, and I think Hybrid as well. And yeah, I actually had good fun with them, but then after 2 weeks, I got benched, I think.
What's the reason for that, actually? Because when I looked it up, like, you only lost one of the 4 games you played. Like, you won the other games. Now, true, they brought in Kikis, who, to be fair, like, that's Kikis' career. Like, people just go, our jungler isn't quite what we want, just bring in Kikis. Like, that's happened in a million teams. So, is there a reason why they didn't stick with you?
I mean, Kikis was, I would say, like, probably the better player at the time. So I kind of understand. I was like, I look back on the games I played, and I was just like playing as if it was solo queue, just like not even looking at my camps, just like looking at lanes and trying to gank for stupid reasons. I mean, I played like good in some of them because it worked out, and I was mechanically, well, I'm mechanically good, I'd say. But then there was like 1 or 2 games which highlighted that I just kind of wasn't ready for the big stages.
Okay, right. Obviously, a player you would team up with much later and who's become a very, very famous player is Alfari, who's kind of been like one of your, I mean, you're both from the UK, you both played in a bunch of teams, and people might not know, you played with him also before he was a known quantity and way before anyone thought he was a top player. So who was Alfari back then?
He was just like a UK top player who I would say grinded it out just like me. He went to like UK lands and he was almost always the better top, and I played with him and like Kiva and some other players, and we just stomped like a lot of lands quite easily. And I always thought he was good. He just didn't really. I think some players like get the chance without grinding through the stages, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Depends if they're ready or if their style works or how the team handles them. But I thought he was always good when I played with him in these lands and stuff compared to other top laners.
I mean, people probably know a little bit about him now from him being on the more famous like Origin teams. He's obviously not like a super outgoing guy. Like, he's had to sort of develop a little bit of that. Was something that held him back? Like, it doesn't seem like he's the sort of person who was like networking and becoming friends with all the pros, which does help if you want to get chances in these teams, right?
No, not really. He's not that type of guy. Yeah.
Right, what about this then? So, as you referenced, like, once you were getting to the level where you were playing in some of the better teams, like, one of the teams you were on is one that I think people have just forgotten this one in history, which is the Giants team, right? And the reason why I always remember this team is this is an example to me where, listen, this is just an outsider's layman perspective. Maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong here, but I remember this as an example of where Riot, when they do the patch changes in League of Legends, sometimes really do play God with the entire scene. Like, they can take a team that's not that good. I mean, arguably this maybe happened in later seasons with some of the Misfits teams. Suddenly becomes way better, and then they take some teams that are good and they just cripple them instantly. So the reason I bring this up is that Giants team, when they were going into the playoffs in LCS, was looking really legit. Like, you guys were looking like you were going to go deep. And then when they made that meta switch right before the playoffs, all of a sudden that fucking, like, it was Unicorns of Love, right? They just came out of nowhere and just bodied you guys. So am I on point with this? Was it like a radical switch, whatever happened? As far as I remember, wasn't it when they took out lane swaps or something?
Yeah, you are like, you are bang on, like literally bang on the point. I mean, actually in the Unicorns of Love series, like, I rewatched it a while ago, but we were actually ahead in 1 or 2 of the games. We just threw. Which I guess you could say we could have won, but we deserved to lose because we shouldn't throw a 5k gold lead or whatever it was. But yeah, like, funny story actually, we would in scrims almost like int every lane swap, and it was quite a headache, I would say. But on stage, whenever we lane swap like almost all the time, and it was actually, we just won every game from it because of how our team functioned. And yeah, and then playoffs came and they took that out, and it was a disaster.
And the one other thing I want to ask about in this team as well is another player who, this just shows how quick life can change in the LEC, in EU LCS, was in this particular time when you were winning all these games. You actually had a Korean, people are going to forget this guy played in LEC, called Knight was the mid laner, right? And at the time, he was actually getting quite a lot of hype. Like, people thought he was good, but then obviously he's kind of disappeared after that and hasn't really had much of a career of relevance. So, what was this guy like? Like, what was his strength at the time? Is there a reason, as far as you know, that he washed out the scene, kind of?
I honestly don't know. I just remember that, like, after I left Giants and he stayed, they didn't have like the most successful year, and I don't really know what happened to him. But I always thought he was quite good. He was like all around a good player, and he had like the like motivation and drive to like want to win and compete, and I really liked seeing that in him. Me and him were kind of similar in that, and yeah, I really don't know what happened. I thought he was quite good.
Was he fluent in English?
He was okay. Yeah, he could understand, like he could. There was no like language barrier in game, and he was like quite smart, so like it's easy to teach him like keywords and stuff.
Right, one of the weird parts of your career was when you came to this Roccat team, because there's two details that people need to know about this squad, which is that, first of all, when I say that the team had a losing record, that sounds terrible, but it's actually not as bad as it sounds, because you started with the worst possible record, basically,
Yep.
and then actually sort of recovered almost towards the end. So even though the team wasn't like a relevant playoff team and all the rest of it, like, even though this was just a one split stop, there had to be something to the project, right? Like, clearly, even though the names, a lot of them aren't famous, somehow you improved a lot as the split went on.
I mean, I think it was like part of it was confidence, because the scrims didn't really change when it came to like attitude as well as performance. But then we had that like it's like one of the longest series in the whole of LEC or LCS, whatever you want to call it, against OG. It was like 2 hours and 30 minutes plus, and I think I mega inted a few times. But after that we won, and then we just didn't stop winning. We actually beat G2, who had a record of never losing for like over a year, because they always drew in the best of two for some reason, or won. They never lost, and we managed to actually beat them. And I would say that's due to us winning on stage and getting confidence, as well as the fact that I think the coaching staff did a good job.
Now, obviously, the coach of this particular team was Grabs, who at the time, I mean, he was coach of a bunch of the Roccat teams. At the time, had no rep at all. He was just a German guy who coached the Roccat team, and because Roccat wasn't a good team, people didn't give a fuck. But obviously, since then, has been on better and better teams, and now he's on like I mean, just in terms of resume, he's got one of the best records of any coach ever. Can you give us some insight as to what he was like as a coach back then? Maybe your thoughts in general on him as a coach? Because the big problem he has is when he's on the bad teams, people are going to go, well, the team's bad, you must just be a rubbish coach as well. But then when he wins MSI and all this other stuff, they're just going to go, well, you have all the best players. So I feel like he can't get a break either way on that one. So who is Grabs to you?
I would say Grabs was an extremely good coach, because of the fact that it's like he came from sport, and then he came into esports, and like he would explain how there are similarities on how a team functions and stuff like this, emotions or gameplay and stuff like this. He was also really good at problem solving, so he would ask the right questions and solve like dilemmas between teammates. Obviously Roccat, we were like 0-something, we lost every game, but we still managed to pull through and win. And as I said, scrims were still garbage, but we still, I guess, improved as a team. And I guess he just really, really, really wants to win as well. And I have mad respect for him as a coach.
Now, when you then, the very next split, got to go to Misfits, like, obviously now people are going to start to know part of this story, and because they know the way the story ended that year, they're going to think like, oh, this team's sick, look at all those players. But at the time, the name was appropriate. These were players who'd never made it, or were like bottom of the LCS, you know. So the idea this was going to become a good team, yeah, that would actually seem weird to an outsider. Like, how did you get in this team, and was it apparent early on, like this is a team that can actually do something? Because a lot of these players, you know, again, kind of journeymen in their own right.
You mean at Misfits 2018?
No, the 2017 one.
Oh yeah, 2017. Sorry, it's a long time I was there.
It's all right.
How'd I get in? I think there was a few issues with Cacao, and I was not really that happy in Roccat, and they seemed to want someone like me in their team, and it was kind of like it was really lucky, I would say, and fortunately I got in as well, because I was good friends with already Alfari and Ignaz. I got along with, and Hansama. I was like kind of friends with all of them except maybe PowerOfEvil, but yeah, it was a lot of luck. Unfortunately, I ended up on that team, and we did well. Well, not at the start of the split, but we did well eventually.
Well, that's actually the thing I wanted to talk about is, again, this just shows how I've always said one of the flaws, unfortunately, of the format in League of Legends is no one really remembers the story of each of the weeks of the split. They just remember what the end result is of the split. And so in this particular case, since you finished second, like people will look back like, well, of course they would do well at Worlds. Look how good they are. But I'll give people some little facts. You actually had a losing record in the actual group, though to be fair, the two best teams in the league were in your group. But there's a couple of details there. One, like that in itself is kind of unusual, right? That you do kind of just okay in the group stage, but then have this miraculous playoff run. So did something change? Was it the fact you had the two best teams in the group? What would you put it down to?
I mean, we were definitely learning throughout the split. I feel like we were also trying stuff, a lot of different stuff throughout the split, and we kind of just finalized it for going into playoffs. And we found our own style, which was quite obvious as to what it was. But we played it really well. We worked well as a team and functioned well, and we ended up winning. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like a PG answer, but I still remember how like we would play stuff that like really early game stuff, and we would get like 4K leads. Even oh my god, we got like a 9K lead against H2K, and we lost that game. Like we threw it and lost, and I think that was like the first time I cried after an LCS game. It was so sad. But yeah, eventually went into playoffs with our own style. Said fuck the other styles. We're like gonna one trick this style, and it just worked out. It paid off. Yeah.
Now, the really interesting thing here is I actually will give credit to some of the people I used to have as my co-hosts. Like, I think Kelsey, when I had Narrative Wake, even was one of the people who sort of identified this early, which is, again, another key detail to remember, is when you guys made it to the final, you did so in the semi-finals by not just beating, but actually pretty much destroying Fnatic. And if people don't know, Fnatic was the team with the best record, and they were in the same group as G2. This is when G2 was more like they were the team that just got it together in the playoffs. You know, they weren't the dominant team. So on paper, right, this Fnatic team, which if people don't know, listen, they had Caps and Broxer and Reckless and all these players that people know now. They didn't have they hadn't progressed yet, but they had the big names that next year were obviously monsters. And one of the reason why I say I'll give credit to our co-hosts is they actually identified that there was upset potential in this series, even though on paper there should have been none, specifically because, and this is an interesting topic going forwards, they saw weaknesses in Brox's game, basically. And they basically, what a lot of people have denied since then, but it's to some degree true, is he was a player where, yeah, if he had 3 winning lanes, and at the time you could just farm in the jungle, like, he wouldn't be exploited. You know, people couldn't get to this guy. And it's not that he was a bad player, but his weaknesses weren't being exploited. And if people remember, this was a big series for you individually, right? So what do you think on this angle? Like, was there some sort of a stylistic edge that you guys had? How did you win this series? And do you agree? Was this like a pop-off series for Maxlore?
I always meme about the series in terms of like giving Caps PTSD, because afterwards, I swear to God, he just banned Zach against me all the time. He just perma-camped Caps, who was quite over-aggressive and had not the best matchups if his jungler wasn't playing around him. And that's basically how we exploited Fnatic, as well as some... I would say like I was playing junglers at the time that no one else really played and were actually just good, and like the team really drafted around me and played around me in some situations like really well, and I was able to fortunately like pull it off like a Rengar against their comp, and Reckless was not able to play like his Ashe game, for example. But yeah, I would say that was like a really good series from me, but it was also I just like punished Caps' over-aggression and the lack of like synergy between Broxer and Caps.
Do you think, like, has that narrative with Broxer been exaggerated? Do you think he did have some flaws that were exploited?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like he's not the best jungler in the world, right? And so he probably has weaknesses that are to be exploited. I think generally we banned against Broxer. We banned like 2 champions at the time, and it was a lot easier to win, I would say. But that was kind of what we did against like a lot of junglers. You just banned like 1 or 2 champions, and they couldn't really play anymore. Like it was Sejuani and Skarner at the time, and I don't think his Gragas was that good. So we just, and Lee Sin wasn't meta, I think. So we just exploited that the champion pool.
Now, in the final, though, listen, if the rest of the story was great, if this was a movie, you'd win the final, wouldn't you? You'd come back. But the final was actually just a stomp, wasn't it? Like, that wasn't a good one. Was that again, like, you've been quite honest here. It's not like your team was the most diverse in playing style. Like, you basically said you went into the playoffs and were like, fuck it, let's just play this one style. As you say here, let's just try and ban out the other jungler. And then, let's just go for it. Now, that G2 team was obviously a very good team, especially when they got to playoffs. That didn't work at all in the final.
Yep. They kind of knew what type of team we were, and they even told me afterwards that we just like always play by the book. And they like the biggest giveaway was like whenever we got Nash control, they just knew we wouldn't start it. And I don't think we adapted well at all with that. And I think we actually kind of choked, since it was like the first time all of us played.
Sure.
Apart from
PowerOfEvil was in one. Yeah, he was in one back in the day. But yeah, everyone else was pretty much,
Yeah, it was like the first time with this massive like French crowd. And I think we kind of, after we lost the first game, it was just like, it just kept going downhill, and that's just how it went down.
Right. When you went to Worlds, one of the interesting details I think people often forget is that you didn't just beat TSM once and, like, get lucky and get out of the group. Like, you had to play them in the tiebreaker as well. So you actually won 2 out of 3 games against a team that at the time, people had a lot of hype for that team. Like, that was supposed to be like an NA super team, right?
We actually lost. With the game we lost, we also had a 5k gold lead, just saying. We really threw that one again. Like, actually, that was probably, the game we lost against them was probably one of my best early games, specifically early game performances. Where it was just, the whole of us were just playing like maniacs. The game we like dove them level 2 bot lane when no one else was doing that, like just zoning and proxying, and so I think we played like really well up to when we threw basically. The other games we beat TSM looked a lot better. I think I was like smurfing on Gragas at Worlds that year. Like I had 100% win rate in 3 games. But also like my team, like we all actually played incredibly well that Worlds. So yeah, we beat them.
Now, the reason why it's interesting, like in this interview, obviously, it's not like you're trying to blow up all these wins and make them sound 10 times better. Like, you're basically saying, like, we did some cheesy shit, or we did some stuff people didn't expect, or we had one thing we zoned in and we were like, right, let's execute that. Because that really, to me, plays into the storyline of this, as I referenced in the intro, the very famous quarterfinal where, at a time when like nobody from the West was going to win best of 5s against Korean teams, it just didn't happen back then. You guys almost did it before the other teams did the next year, because this SK Telecom team, you took them to 5 games. There were some games that were looking really awesome. People obviously remember Ignar, etc. Wasn't there kind of some element of that to this game as well? Like, I mean, listen, as I said before, if the year before Riot fucked you over by changing the meta, this is like they literally, it's like they wanted Ignar to have a chance to win this series, because at the time, right, they just, he had the weird counter in his pool to all the other supports that everyone else played. So did you guys actually identify this and realize, like, we have to play into that?
It was, it was like, so we knew Ardent was meta, and we knew it was like completely giga broken. Even in like scrims when Ezreal jungle was a thing at that time, people would get like 6k gold leads but still lose because, wow, their support hit Ardent, they have a tank and you don't. Okay, GG, well played. That's literally how it worked. So we came up with the idea to actually have Ardent in other roles, and I actually thought Ivan was meta. We thought, I thought Ivan was playable and like quite good at the time, who could build Ardent, and Tristan PowerOfEvil thought that Karma was quite good, who could also build Ardent. And Ignar's biggest strength, I would say, is like playmaking and engaging. He's absolutely insane on those champs, and Steven Hanshammer's preference is like lane bully, and so we just like we played our own way, and we've always been like that, even in the EU LCS when we played in 2017, and we just decided to go with it. We didn't really play with nameplates, if you know what I mean. We didn't think, it's SKT, like we're gonna there's a chance we're gonna lose, like Faker knows everything. We just went in honestly believing we could win, and we almost did.
Was it surreal to be like winning games against Faker?
Honestly, at the time, with all the adrenaline going on, I think so. After the first game, like the question was, does Faker play Galio? And the answer was yes, and it was a really fast win from them. So we were like, okay, straight up, we're banning Galio, and then we addressed the problems, because I think we were playing like super passive and not playing our usual selves. And then we just went in game 2, just pedal to the metal, and just absolutely just played the way we wanted to, and did extremely well throughout the series until we threw.
Now, when you guys, actually, one thing I want to ask about, since this lineup changed next year, is PowerOfEvil. So obviously he was the established name in your team, but he's had a very interesting career, because the thing I notice about PowerOfEvil is he can only be underrated or overrated. It's like every time he does well, people go, oh, fucking hell, he's just like one of the absolute best. And it's like, well, calm down a bit. But then they always go too far the other way. Like if he has a bad split, they're like, nah, he's garbage, get rid of him. And then he always, it's always the matches people don't think he'll win. He has some uncanny ability to like match up well with someone he shouldn't, or like obviously he has a very unusual way of playing the game. Since you were his jungler, and for almost every season of League of Legends, like jungle mid synergy has been one of the main factors as to which teams win and which teams do well. How would you explain PowerOfEvil? Like, how do you have to play around PowerOfEvil? How does he want to play the game? How does he see the game?
Actually, he sees the game in like such a unique way, and he explains it pretty well. Like, I wouldn't say in game, out of game, he tries to explain what he wants to do in certain matchups, and it's actually quite smart what he wants to do. When he knows how to play a champ properly, mainly control mages, he comes up with things that I haven't heard other people really say. Like he would say at the time, and I don't even know if it's viable now, if people do it now, he would say like Syndra against Orianna. As soon as both hit 6, the guy that presses R first like can win the matchup basically. So I knew that when he hit 6 and I was there, we would just win mid, and then win mid jungle, and then just control the map. He would like kind of teach me how he wants to play, and we worked really well like that basically. And he also had his like niche builds for different champions he's playing against, stuff like that, and explained it. And it was a pleasure playing with him when he was on those champions. Yeah.
That's one key thing. That plays into the reason why he gets overrated or underrated. Is he's not the mid laner clearly that has the champion ocean and just plays whatever's broken, right? In fact, the weird thing about him, I think why people end up underrating him, is they see, as you're saying, matchups where they would think the other side wins it. But that's the key thing for me, is if you listen to the way even some pro players describe matchups, they make it sound like one champion beats the other one. In all cases, at all times, it's just better, and therefore you should only play that side of the matchup. Whereas as far as I can tell, one of the things PowerOfEvil has like a special mindset for is knowing like the niche cases where like actually, like you say, like that champion actually can get an edge on this at a certain moment in the game. Therefore, presumably you need your team to play around you at that point, or you've got to hit a certain power spike, and from that moment you have a chat. So this is it must be very different to most other mid laners you've played with.
Yeah, I agree. And I would also like to mention that he's actually, as weird as it sounds, like another huge strength about PowerOfEvil is his like him as a person, as a teammate. He was just like incredibly positive and just made the environment more calm. Pretty sure without that it would have been a lot harder, but he was a good teammate. Yeah, it was like incredible actually.
Right, the next year obviously was one that was pretty rough, at least in the early portion. Like this was the time period where you guys had to go against, you had to replace PowerOfEvil with Sencox, because obviously PowerOfEvil went to North America. Ignar left as well, so then you brought in Mickey X, who, listen, his name's massive now, but at the time was still like a flawed but good player, some people thought.
I thought he was fantastic, honestly. Every duo game, I thought he was insane.
Well, that's one thing I want to ask about is now people will just say, again, like hindsight, oh, he's the fucking best player. Yeah, oh, of course I'd want to see that guy. But back then, the meme was people just said, oh, he is really good in lane, but he doesn't talk. And he's not, and here's the difference, unlike an Ignar, he's not going to do all these roams and all that actually shit he's really quite famous for now. So who was he when he was in your Misfits team?
I mean, I said to Mickey when I was doing with him and like I wanted him on my team, I said to him, if he learned, this was a Mithy like at his prime, right? I said to Mickey, if he learns to talk a bit, he would be one of the best, if not the best supports in Europe. That's why I honestly thought of him. He was incredibly mechanically. He would play a bit like Ignar, where he would just be like so insane on these engaged champs, but he would also play his niche ones like Poppy support and stuff like this. And like through spring and even summer, he improved his, I wouldn't say communication is like, oh, you need to like micromanage everyone, but just like the amount needed to make the team function or like compact good information. And he eventually got quite good at that and did an absolutely good job.
Now, the player on this particular team, though, in part because, listen, he was replacing PowerOfEvil, and also Listen, he's also not like the biggest personality in the world or whatever. The person who I think that this team killed the career of, unfortunately, is actually Sencox. Because if people don't remember, I always tell people this, when that Splice team of all the Danish players went to Worlds that year and had made the final like the previous year, people actually considered Sencox like the best player on the team. Like, he was supposed to be the star player. I know now people are going to look back and go, well, Wonder was on that team, or maybe they're like big fans of obviously some of the other players. Obviously, Cold was there, a whole bunch of players that since then went on to bigger things. What was it like to play with Sencox this year? And was there some sort of a problem? Did his game not integrate? What happened?
No, I actually think Sencox was like incredibly underrated for our wins in spring and summer as well. I think he was like an all-around mid laner. Like, he was like good at everything, but like not like especially insane on something. Apart from, like, we used to meme it a lot, but he was the Void King. So like any Void champion cast him, Malzahar. He was or the Dragon King, like Aurelion Sol and stuff. But he was like actually an incredible player who played mainly for the team, and at the time we thought that playing through bot was the best chance of winning, and he adapted really well. He would talk, like, he would call a decent amount, sometimes not as much as, like, he would show moments of brilliance, but sometimes not as much on stage or something. Certain situations happen, but I think he was quite good, really good. We had like actually insane synergy, and I think he's incredibly underrated for our wins in our like Smurf run in Summer Split.
The thing is, as you're saying that though, that if you know the way narratives work, it makes perfect sense why nobody was rating them. Because if you play more for the team as a mid, listen, it's Europe, you're supposed to be the star player, you're supposed to kill everyone, you know. And then secondly, if your champions that you're really good at is like Malzahar and Aurelion Sol, you won't even get the credit for the wins. People will just be like, oh, you just sit middle, and then they tell you to go in or some shit, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's like, his greatest strength is his brain for sure. But like, as I said, like, he played a lot for the team, so unfortunately the narrative didn't really go as well his way, and the community was flaming him a lot. And you know, that I don't know whether or not that got to him, but it was quite sad to see as his teammate.
Right, this was also a split where, if people remember, the next split, rather, the summer one, was a very weird one, because first of all, it was the one where we had the funnel meta for a whole period of time, which was kind of like, it's like, at this point in time, it's like a black hole in the league where we've all just forgotten that happened because it was just so weird, and it wasn't like League of Legends before. But if people forget, the narrative everyone forgets is this. Because famously, coming in from MSI, like, obviously it was Fnatic who went at that point in time, we always used to have this thing called like the MSI hangover, where, you know, the first 2 weeks everyone comes back from MSI and they're always shit, etc. This was the time where, when we switched to the funnel meta and Reckless was benched himself, and if people don't know, Whipple was playing bot lane because it was all these mages and this weird fucked up comp, right? At the time, your team was the one that actually started insane. Like, you were winning all the games, and the logic was you were one of the only teams that was playing the real AD carries, and that was always the argument given, right? Which was, if Hans Armour can play all these AD carries, then they must be viable. But as far as I remember, didn't even that basically fall off? Like, how would you explain the way this split began in this kind of the weird transition to funnel?
I think funnel was it was an incredibly weird start. You're right, because we played normally, like we practiced with normal, you know, AD carry, non-funnel, until like a few days before the LCS, when like so many people were playing funnel, and Korea was playing funnel as well, and it was like we a few days before LCS, we were like, oh shit, we need to pick this up, and we picked it up, and we found out that and every time we played against funnel, it didn't really work out that well. So when we tried it, like out of panic, I would say, it felt like it wasn't really the funnel carrying; it was the side laners that like was able to play self-sufficient or just stomp their side, and then eventually the funnel guy would get really fed. Unless if the funnel guy was like, if they were Zyra Khan and you can do things early like Roam and stuff like this. But there was most of the time, like I was actually playing the support side. Hansama, we did something where we made Hansama play the funnel. Sencox would go bot, I would play the support, and Mickey would go support bot lane with Sencox. And it just didn't really work out so well, so we just developed a counter to the funnel, and we like with the champions we played, because we were incredibly aggressive early. And it really worked. Like in scrims, we barely lost funnel, and on stage we completely stomped Fnatic when they played the funnel. I think it was Fnatic. And it was really weird. Like I don't think G2 played against us, but as I said, really weird. Didn't work for us. We played our own way and just like stomped everyone.
Because this then brings about another classic Misfits. Like, if you notice, Misfits also is a team where it's like, it's only when people write you off that then the crazy results come out and you always get some mad shit. Because this was one where, listen, obviously it was a different G2 to the past years. This was when they changed basically most of the players, and they had the 3 players they had now. They have Wonder, Yankos, Perks, but then the bot lane was the infamous Yarn and Wadid bot lane. Funnily enough, players you've played with in the past in your career.
Yep.
And in this playoffs, like, they were supposed to be the second best team. It was supposed to be Fnatic are the best. These are the second best. Obviously, Misfits loses to them, and then they go up. But you got a monster upset here. What happened in this series? Because I feel like this is a series where if you ever talk to those G2 players, they themselves don't know what the fuck happened that split. Like, it's a mystery to them, I think, mate.
As I said, we honestly won because we played to our biggest strengths, which was early game around bot, and our top laner and mid laner, like. I also think Alfari was incredibly underrated, and I even said it in a few interviews in like the reasons for our win, because we never played around him, but he was completely solid, just stomping everyone. In that series, he actually completely shoved on Wonder, like Cho'Gath against GP, and solo killed him twice and carried like the first game. And just we played around bot and dove them like level like really early, quite often. And our mid lane, like they were kind of stomping our mid jungle because we took like something weak mid, but because of the way we played, Senkux always pretty much took TP to always be able to go bot in case the Perks decide to move there, and that's pretty much how we won, because we just, as I said, used our incredible bot lane, who were really good at lane, and our top and mid playing for a team, and me just perma-camping bot, as well as as I said, the first game Alfari just shoving Wonder into the pavement.
Right, obviously in the next round you played Fnatic, who, I mean, it's not going to be a spoiler. Anyone who knows League of Legends knows, like, they won the 2 splits that year. They obviously went to the final of Worlds. And the funny thing is, I actually feel like that team's almost been forgotten, because the problem is since G2 came along the next year, including with Caps, and did even more, as much as that, people forget, like, this was one of the best runs we've ever seen of any team in Western League of Legends. So how good actually was this Fnatic lineup?
I actually can't remember if they beat us or not.
They did.
They did. Oh, I remember. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I think, I mean, it pretty much felt the same as the year before. We went in with the same strategy. We still thought we could win, but we unfortunately, we lost apparently. I don't even remember it. I guess I have PTSD from it.
Just deleted it from your brain.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But we went in with the mindset of we could beat anyone. Like, there was no team that we were scared of. We knew that like a team that we really didn't want to play against, because they worked well against us, which was Splice at the time, completely like felt like countered our style, and we just countered like G2. It was like a triangle basically.
Right.
And yeah, I guess we lost. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously that leads into the problem here is this is where the story starts to get a bit depressing if you're a fan of Misfits, because you guys didn't go to Worlds. Like, Splice was the team you played, and
yep.
They were the team that were able to beat you.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we should have won that. I mean, it's so easy to say you should have won, but then the other team can do the same if they lose as well, right?
No, but here's the thing, though. I know what you mean. Like, what I would say is this. It's more like, when you say should, what you mean is you could see the way you could have won. Like, it was like, now it seems obvious. All the time, it was like, right, if we do this, we win. And it's just, percentages. Sometimes it goes the other way, right?
Yeah, we literally, like, we were ahead the 5th game, like 5k or 4k again, classic Misfit story. We had like 4 or 5k, and then we just inted. I remember exactly where I was, like, by the Raptor, we just inted, and we gave Vayne a kill. And then we gave Vayne like loads of kills, and they took Baron, I think, and the game was just over, since we were playing like early game, which was, as I said, our style, and Splice were our arch nemesis.
Now, when it comes to basically 2019 season 9, right, this is one of the basically there's teams that have underperformed before, but I think on paper I understand why people originally thought this was going to be a monster team. Like, I really thought it was going to be a team that was like challenging for the LCS title, because if you look at the players across the board, there's not really any player that should be bad. In fact, I actually still think, even though players underperformed, it really does seem like the ultimate example of stylistic mismatch, because some of these players since then are good, or some of these players before that were fantastic players. So when you got some of these players, let's talk about them individually. Like when you got Soaz, if people forget, yes, he was the sob for Fnatic, but that was mainly because Bwipo had like all the meta champions at the time, and obviously was just he was on kind of like, I won't say like beginner's luck, but he was just having an amazing first period in Fnatic, you know. But if people forget, Soaz at the time was still supposed to be one of the best players in the entire West. I mean, he's obviously a legendary player. When you get a player like that, did you have a difficult, like, was there something about playing with Soaz that just didn't connect with you? Obviously, you played with Alfari for success before. Like, what was the disconnect there, do you think?
I mean, I honestly don't like talking about 2019 a lot because I still have, like, I would still say it was, I always feel like I'm in control of my own destiny. So if I fail, it's always my fault, even if even if everyone around me is burning, which is why 2019 is quite hard for me. But it was hard to synergize with Soaz at the start. I mean, it was hard in general for everything. Like the whole thing kind of felt quite difficult because we had a new coaching staff, a completely new completely new players. We had like Febby coming from NA, you know, just like recovering basically in EU, just like playing its actual good players. And there was like a Gorilla bot lane who was actually good, but there was some issues there with language or whatever, and it just made everything quite hard. And it was just a shit fest. Yeah, that's a TLDR.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. Like, just a couple of other questions along those lines. Then, okay, if you say like you want to always feel like your destiny's in your own hands, like you know, if you win, people can get credit, but if you lose, you have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as this was just the worst year of Maxlore's career? Were there other things going on that we don't know about? Like, why did everything fall apart after a couple of, you know, up and down but pretty good years all in all?
Okay, so if I'm going to be completely honest about something, it's for spring specifically, I wanted to change because I played like 2.5 years, and as I said, my mindset is always to put it on myself if I lose and don't succeed or something. So for 2.5 years, I didn't succeed. I don't call that Worlds run. Everyone like said it's amazing and stuff, but at the end of the day, we lost. Like we went to Worlds wanting to win the whole thing, and I still see it as a lose in my books. So after 2.5 years of really, really wanting to win and just like devoting my whole life, literally waking up, thinking about League, going to sleep, thinking about League, going to the toilet, thinking about League, showering, thinking about like everything. I decided for Spring Split, I wanted to try a different approach where you increase like the quality of life, because I never really gave a shit about the quality of my life. I would just always, I wouldn't seek happiness at all. I would just go for whatever's needed to be done to win, even if I'm feeling like absolute crap. So I tried to like, I could never find the balance. And so I wanted to try to find the balance for spring and ramp up for playoffs in terms of solo queue, for example. My solo queue numbers, I purposely didn't want it too high at the start and I wanted to ramp it up.
Okay.
But I don't know if that contributed to poor play, poor synergy, poor atmosphere, poor everything. But it's something I tried and it didn't work. So I went into Summer Split with being my old usual self, but there was, again, other issues where I didn't really get the chance to prove myself, basically. As I said, the whole, that's like the biggest thing, I guess, that changed within me for spring. But I don't necessarily think it's entirely to blame. However, yeah, to answer your question, 2019 is definitely a year that was the most painful as well. And hopefully in my many years to come, when I make it back to the LEC, I can just see 2019 as the biggest learning experience, because every lose is a learn.
Yeah, well, one last thing along those lines I would say then is this is also where it's a bit like the Sencock story. This is where like narratives in the community, and especially here's the one thing: people can play bad, but if they play bad and it sort of overlaps into getting memed on, it's really hard to recover from that, because the whole point of memes is like they're ideas that propagate around the world, and they just become more famous than the actual, like, somebody who's never watched the games hears the memes. And obviously people basically almost made you a meme after this. Like, people wrote you off completely, right?
Yep.
Is the reason why we haven't seen you since, did you really get no opportunities? Did it wreck your career that way? Did you take time off and just think, fuck it, I can't play after what happened?
Honestly, it did. I think it did kind of wreck my career. There was so many rumors, which I was incredibly sad to hear. Like, I was a toxic teammate, or just toxic and bad and unwilling to change, and that was like the complete opposite of what I aimed to do or aimed for. There was, the community completely shitting on me. It doesn't really help that I say on camera, and the question that Misfits asked after Somerset is, name one thing you could change, and I said me. Because
right, sure, you didn't mean it in that way, obviously. Yeah,
I mean, me as in, like, I could have done a better job. That's literally it. And
were you too honest in that sense, do you think, by saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I try to say
you don't really big yourself up, do you?
I'm not really good at lying.
Right.
But I believe that maybe I was too honest. Obviously, I didn't realize the backlash, but it would never change the way I think, whether I say it on or off camera. As I said, bad rumors about me, which made it hard to find a team. Even this year, there was like crazy rumors about me that, like, for example, I wouldn't play if I didn't have like a massive paycheck or something.
Right.
So which stopped me even getting opportunities, which is just a bit sad. But my goal is, I'm not under pressure, because I don't really feel like, I'm under pressure, but I'm not under pressure of like, oh crap, I have to make it back to the LEC and win Worlds by the time I'm 25, because it's doomed after that. I just see myself playing for a really long time, and I don't feel like, I think my mechanics have even gotten better, and I feel like I'm just a lot better than I was, so I don't plan on retiring anytime soon.
Right, in the same way as when I was asking that question, setting it up about PowerOfEvil, and if people haven't noticed, he's one of the players who I've been very curious about, and so I've read almost like every interview he's done. I've even talked to him privately about getting insight on his philosophy. I would similarly set your career up in a similar fashion, right? Which is, if people have listened in this interview, you haven't actually basically blown up any of the results and made them sound better than they are, or sometimes even when you had actually very big wins and things that to other people would be the highlight of their career, you've been like very brutal sometimes about the fact that, like, yeah, we won, but in a limited way or in a flawed way, or we just attacked this weakness and it worked, like very matter of fact. In some ways, this is kind of like what your philosophy for the game is, right? It's not that you're like the mastermind overall in the game, but you can see where your flaws are, you can see where your strengths are, and you seem to understand how to play to them.
Yeah, you play to your strengths. You don't play to your weaknesses. You can strengthen your strengths and you can improve your weaknesses, but some people, or sometimes you just can't improve your weaknesses. So there's only really one way to go about it, and if you have flexible enough players like we did in Misfits throughout the years, maybe not 2019, but like 2018, we had flexible players and we played to our strengths and we did absolutely amazing. I'm still pretty sure if we went to Worlds that year, we would have done really, really well. I know G2 and Fnatic went quite far, but I feel like we were really good. We didn't get to show it, so I guess that statement is contradictory because we lost, right?
Sure.
But looking back on it now, I feel like we were actually really good.
Right. Since he was a long-time teammate of yours, we've already talked about him before, Alfari. One thing I wanted to ask about him was something very key that you said there, which is the real reason I feel like he's been underrated, basically until he got into Origin and they were just a top team, is his entire skill set normally is for players who are supposed to be bad at top lane. It's the idea of like, oh, if you don't get the resources and you just absorb pressure and you just play like the champions he plays, people think, right, the reason they don't play to you is for a reason. But that's the bizarre thing, is for me, he reminds me a lot of Odoamne actually, where the whole thing is, it's actually that on the one hand, they do play like that, as in they don't demand the resources. But then the idea is, like, I actually saw Alfari himself made a tweet like this. I kind of see where he's coming from. He says, like, like, there's no such thing as weak side players. There's just shadow carries. And that's what these guys are, because the idea is, if they can be self-sufficient and they can somehow, like, absorb pressure, sometimes even win losing matchups, and then obviously give all the resources to, like, the bot lane often, you're going to fucking win a lot of games off that. And in fact, you might even win if your bot lane's not that good. So even though that's brilliant and it's going to make your teammates love you, you're never going to be thought of as the best player doing that. And more importantly, just like Odoam there, sometimes these guys, I almost feel like, because they're amazing at that, they almost fall too in love with that. Whereas, like, some of those players, I wanted some of their teams, some of their splits, when they could play the carries, to just be like, just play around me, dude. Like, I could be the best top player in the league if you play around me. Like, what do you think?
No, I mean, like, I completely agree. Like, if it's like that easy, then you would do it, right? Like, if
Sure.
like you see Alfari like playing carries now and like completely murking and stomping, and they win loads of games from it, right? And he was still kind of good on carries. Obviously, still there were issues, but he was still good on carries in those days. But we just couldn't get the wins from it. So, you know, he, like the competitor he is, he like, and Senkooks as well, they did whatever it took to win, and we ended up playing to our stronger side, basically.
Okay. What would you say, in like, since people always use that exact description of Alfari, they always say he is very self-sufficient top laner. Like, how far does that actually go if you're his jungler? Like, is he a guy really you can just leave on, like, the metaphorical island and you just play the rest of the map? Like, is he someone where you try and get him ahead early in a kill or something, and then you go to, like, what's the best way to make Alfari shine, you think?
I mean, you can do both, which is why I think he's like a really good player. He would, like, back in the day, he would play Mundo. Like, that was the most OP champ when he would play it, because he would literally 1v2 lane. But then there would come a point where he would hit like 2 or 3 items and just literally 1v9. Like, just not die, kill everyone, even though he's playing shadow carry, let's say. But I would still say his strength is playing around him, because he makes it quite easy. Like, it was rough at the start, but like, I feel like he improved his comms so much to like give really good info on what a jungler really wants to hear. And he just does a fantastic job of like understanding matchups 2v2 and 1v1 top. And the thing that I could always rely on was he would almost never lose lane. Like, if he tells me the lane goes like this, the lane will almost always go like this. And that's really rare to find in a lot of players. He would always play to how he said it would go. I could literally count on one hand how many times he got solo killed in scrims. That's how crazy it is. And that's why I think it's like quite good to play around him, because it's like he micromanages you somewhat if he feels like it.
Right. Obviously, I'm going to sound like I'm putting you on the spot a bit here towards the end of the interview, but with good reason, right? Basically, as you've said, you are clearly motivated to want to come back to League of Legends. You've even talked already, without sounding cocky, like, if I can get back to the LEC, you know, I'm going to keep trying. It's all these rumours, right? If you had to kind of like sell yourself, like, this is who I am as a player, or who I'm going to be, or what my goals are in that sense, what would you say?
My goal is the same as it always was, and that's to be the best player in the world. Whether that's a narrative, whether that's me micromanaging 4 monkeys to win, I'll always try to be the best player in the world and excel at whatever I need to do to win. I don't exactly know. It's hard for me to sell myself without sounding cocky or arrogant, like you said. And
but what do you bring to a team then?
I would say that I have like a lot of experience. I would say I'm like really smart. I would say I have good mechanics, especially for a jungler, and I can learn quite well and easily, and I'm not afraid to like ask questions, and I'll do whatever it takes to win.
And then, since it's the theme you've kind of brought up yourself, like, An interesting detail is I've often told this story that in season 5, so 2015, I did like one of those really long interviews with Nuke, right? And at the time, because he'd had that whole year where he was like banned and he was in Challenger, and then he joined that Roccat team that like just never did anything basically, I really thought in this interview, like, because at the time, you know, this is pretty young in League of Legends and people didn't have very long careers back then. I really thought like this is probably going to be one of those interviews where it's sort of like, you know, oh, you're going to give it one more year and, you know, you're going to see how it goes. And, you know, maybe after that, like, do you look back and regret a lot of your career? And he basically told me like the opposite. He basically told me like, nah, I love League of Legends. I'm going to play for like 5 more years if I like it. In fact, like he had nothing in his mind like that of like, I'm going to retire. It was more like you'd have to make the guy retire basically.
Yeah.
You've made it sound like you plan to play for years. Like this, you plan to be a pro gamer again. It's a full-time profession, right?
I will play as long as I think I can achieve my goal or know I can achieve my goal. I've always been, I've been brought up by a dad who always I've been brought up competitive. I was like, always wanted to be the best. I wouldn't say it's the best childhood, but always needed, not even wanted, like needed to be the best. And that's always my goal in whatever game I play seriously, whether it's sport in real life or, not real life, but, you know, just a sport like football or tennis or any game I play or like piano. I've played for like 16 years and it's taught me a lot on like learning and the grind. But yeah, as long as I can achieve my goal, I'll keep playing.
Right. At the end of the interview, do you have any final words or is there someone you'd like to thank or say hello to?
Well, I'd like to thank firstly my dad, who's always helped me with like getting back up and giving me like life advice and stuff like this. I'm not sure he'll probably listen to this whole interview because he's my dad, like my #1 fan, but he's incredible. And secondly, I'd like to thank all my supporters, so including my dad, I guess, for supporting me and sticking by me. And this is probably, hopefully, the lowest low I'll go. And hopefully it'll just be like smooth sailing and I can make it back into the LEC and make you all proud. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it, Matt. I'll just cut it on that.
And thank you for the interview.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no problem. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Bobby, Dean Tanglis, Istar, JDubs, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, Soliko, Spencer Green, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question in those AMAs I do each month. Do you want teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions about esports with me. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.